We're here today not to reimagine or reinvent anything, but to remind you of something that's been in place for 100 years. And that is arguably the greatest conservation success story that there is, and that's the success story of the American wild turkey. We have had the wild turkey around for a long time, but we also have had a champion of the telling that story who has made it possible and provided an example for many of us that have developed a passion for the wild turkey, a guy named Don Hyndman, who was recognized as the patron saint of the volunteer backbone of the National Wild Turkey Federation, who we owe a debt of gratitude to for the conservation that has taken place with the wild turkey. He always said, tell the story, be an ambassador. And so I'm going to try to make that story clear. We also want to try to answer questions that come in. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a boots on the ground person, not a thumbs on the screen person. All this new language of Zooming and live streaming and virtual things are new to me. So I'm going to do the best I can. I also want to be sure to try to answer questions when they're asked. And if we can't answer them all, I'll be available to answer them one way or another. And I invite you to join us on June 12th at Stackhouse Park for a clinic that we offer every year. One in the spring and one in the fall. COVID doesn't make this any easier, but we're going to be able to continue with a 277-acre classroom. We don't have to worry about social distancing. So we invite you to join us. If we don't answer your questions today or cover all that we hope to, and I know that we can't cover it all, but let's start with the history of the wild turkey. And we won't go back to the very best hunters, the Native Americans, who had to be good hunters to be able to put food in front of their teepee. But let's start at the year 1900, at the turn of the century. There were probably somewhere in the neighborhood of only 30,000 turkeys then, because up to that point there were only two types of hunting. There was subsistence hunting, which the people did to be able to live and to eat, and there was market hunting. And the people that were market hunters were killing anything and everything that they could to sell at market to turn a buck. And of course, without any regulation, we saw what happened back then. History made it clear that that was the end of the passenger pigeon. The buffalo were decimated terribly, and so were the turkeys. And they went to a habitat where they could survive. Although they're very gregarious birds, they also are very solitary if they're pressured, and they know how to protect themselves. So let's fast forward then through this period to a period where Theodore Roosevelt became the president of the United States. In life, as in literature, there are flat characters, round characters. The flat characters are one-dimensional people that just sort of fill in the blanks. The round characters are multi-dimensional, fascinating characters that have so many dimensions. It's amazing to be with them and around them, and they're so appreciated. Teddy Roosevelt was one of those people. He was a cop. He was a combat soldier. He was a hunter. He was a naturalist. He loved nature. We can thank him for the national park system that we have now. But as a hunter, he also enjoyed that so much that he saw the need to redefine hunting. The best term he could come up with was sport hunting. And he did away with market hunting. That was no longer legal. But he tried to point out that sport hunting is an opportunity to get wholesome exercise and family enjoyment, but also an opportunity to appreciate the resource, put value on the resource, to respect the resource. And that's exactly what he did. And he was also a shining example of the ethical ways to do it. There's a famous story of a bear hunt that he went on. And having been a guide for a long time, I can only imagine the pressure of taking the President of the United States on a hunt. And this guide, to be sure that the President would be successful, solved the problem, he thought, by going out and tying a bear to a tree. Took Teddy Roosevelt out to the bear and said, "Have at it, there's your bear." So he said, "No, this isn't the way it's done. Turn that bear loose." He wouldn't shoot it. So he didn't end up getting his bear, even when the hunt was over. But this story got so much recognition and so much play that there was an enterprising entrepreneur who hopped on the opportunity and started selling stuffed bears that came to be known as, you guessed it, teddy bears. But he has left us with a legacy that provides us now with legalized, regulated, legal regulated hunting. Those words are important. That's a big difference between that and poaching. We have agencies, we have people that work very hard to monitor everything that we do so that all the conservation can be handled, the conservation tenets can be adhered to, so that we can enjoy the hunting that we do today and maintain all of the species in habitat that works for they work together. And with this happening, the only way it can really come together biology of the wild turkey, which is fascinating to me. I have to admit that I have a passion for the wild turkey and regard it as the crown jewel of everything that we have in nature. Because like any other subject or discipline, it seems like the more you learn, the more there is to learn. Take, for example, just the head of the wild turkey. You'll see that there are no feathers on that head. It's the only part of its body that doesn't have feathers, except for on the hen turkey, where there are some feathers that go up over the back of its neck and across the top. But with the gobbler, the male, there's no hair there at all. So what's this mean? Well, this exposed area without any insulation is the air conditioner for the turkey. It has a vast vascular system, blood flow everywhere, where it can swell up and actually regulate the temperature of its whole body. This snoot that you see hanging down here can actually get to great lengths. Like you see on the gobbler that is mounted up here, it can get down to a very great length, which increases the overall surface area of the bird and allows it to regulate its temperature. The color's changing with the the amount of blood flow in the bird, can tell you the mood that it's in, whether or not it is on the alert or frightened. This hen over here, if you look at the snoot, has a snoot that's only this long because it's not relaxed. It is very much on the alert. Another thing that is interesting to note is you don't see any visible ears, but there are holes here, the auditory canal. And the gobblers, as well as the hens, all have unbelievable hearing qualities. They can hear great distances. Their hearing is much better than ours. Their eyes, however, are probably one of the most unusual biological features of their whole body. If you notice how they're positioned on the side of their head, they are actually able to see 330 degrees without turning their head. They're not colorblind. They can distinguish colors. They don't blink, but they have, like a frog, a nictitating membrane that's made up of epithelial cells that secrete mucus and keep their surface of their eye comfortable. If you don't follow me on that, see how long you can go without blinking your eyes. Like I said, they are an amazing bird. Once you get to witness them and observe them in the wild, watching the colors change in their head as their mood change, it's amazing, and it tells you exactly what mood they're in. Some of the other features that are interesting with, and people always have questions about with the wild turkey, how old can you tell? What's the age of a turkey, and how do you determine that? What determines that? On the male, there are spurs. They grow at a slow rate. They have to be at least 3 years old before they get an inch in length. And this is the most predictable, the most accurate way to determine the age of a bird. Hens don't have spurs, so they're going to be a little bit more difficult to determine the age. Usually it's their voice that will help you to tell that. It gets a little bit raspier as they get older. But their weight isn't going to really change significantly. They can get to a certain weight depending upon their size, but they usually are going to stay about the same once they get to adulthood. Gobblers, on the other hand, can reach some immense weights depending upon their subspecies. There are 4 different subspecies in the United States. In a contiguous 48 states, there's the eastern bird. This is an eastern hen, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more at length with regard to a special feature on it. But we have the eastern bird around here. We have the Rio Grande birds in the Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico area, up into Kansas, even as far up as in the Rocky Mountain areas. There's another bird, which is the Miriam, and then the 4th subspecies is what this one is, from a very small area in Florida. From probably Orlando south is the line of demarcation. That's the only place on Earth that you can find the Osceola turkey. And it is very similar to the eastern turkey, but they all have distinguishing markings. Some of them are very subtle. The Osceola has the least amount of white of any of the birds. If you look at the wing feathers, the flight feathers, the white barring is broken. There's very little white compared to the eastern wing. The tail has tiger striping in it, as opposed to straight striping like in the eastern tail. By the same token, the Rio Grande turkeys have a more coppery color. They have a lighter buff end on the tail-coated feathers. The Miriam's turkey, on the other hand, has it has the most white. So much brightness to it because of the white tips of their tail feathers, more white in their wings. And then there's another subspecies that is down in Mexico and now is being reintroduced into the United States in Arizona, and that's the Gould's turkey. Now, that's an interesting thing to make note of, because that chronicles some of the biological great strides that have been taken by the people that we can be so thankful for, that have done some milestone achievements with regard to the conservation of the wild turkey. We can be very Pennsylvania proud for that, because we have the #1 biologist who was just recognized last year with the Henry Mosby Award for the #1 turkey biologist in the United States, in Mary Jo Castellina, who is our Pennsylvania Game Commission turkey biologist. We also have an award-winning artist who has done some of these posters that we have here, Bob Sopcich. They're educational, that tell us the differences, how to distinguish the difference between the two sexes of birds. And we have a responsibility to be able to tell gender, because in the spring of the year, we're only allowed to kill bearded birds. And some hens actually have beards. So that was really giving the hunter a break. Even if they couldn't tell the difference between a hen and a gobbler, they still had the responsibility for looking for a beard. Now, this is a bearded hen. You see that she has a beard. We have some hen beards in a shadow box that show that the hen beards can get quite lengthy, but they're usually very thin and spindly. They're not as full and bushy as the male bird, but probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5% of the hens can have birds. So like the human species, there are bearded ladies. I had a youngster here, it was just last year actually, who shared with me that there's a lady in his church that had a beard. His mother wasn't too pleased that he shared that information, but it happens. Now, the beards too are one of the things that some people consider what makes a bird a trophy because of the beard length. Beards will grow 4 or 5 inches every year, but they don't keep growing because they're going to be shortened by natural attrition. When they fight, whenever they get attacked by a predator, and also in terms of the nutrition can cause things to happen. In this shadow box, we have one beard, and I don't know whether you can see it or not, but the beard in the middle has a blonde tip on the end. And it's not a rock star or anything. It doesn't go to the hairdresser. What happened there is there's a period of growth where there was poor nutrition and there wasn't enough melanin to support the color of that beard. And during that growth period, that makes a brittle area. So it will break off naturally as it's feeding and moving around. So it's never going to get to a great length, but whenever you do have a beard that's 12 or 14 inches, that's something spectacular. It's something to really be respected. It's something that can really be proud of whenever they discipline themselves to be using a resource that has gotten to those proportions. Now, one of the features of a gobbler that people ask about is the intelligence. You know, how smart is that bird? And we use this skull to try to point out that, as I said, the eyes are a biological feature that are very important in the wild see how big that eye socket is compared to how small the cranial cavity is. So it's not an Albert Einstein. It's not as smart, probably, as people give it credit for, so much as it takes every single step, every day, in mortal fear for its life. So it has to be very, very careful. That hearing, that wonderful hearing, allows it to distinguish any sounds that are unnatural. The scariest of which for it is a full human voice. They're going to be out of dodge. They are not curious like a deer. They are very, very careful with every step that they take. We also use this skull just to show how small the hunter's target is. To ethically, humanely decide to pull that trigger and take the shot at a turkey. If it's looking straight at you, that doesn't give much of a target at all. And so this is something that we always try to keep in mind. Probably, one other thing about the beards. There are some birds that have actual multiple beards, and there can be a lot of them. And I have this shadow box to show that, but I can tell you one of the most impressive examples of a multiple beard that I ever saw was a fellow had his bird mounted that had 6 beards, and he had it mounted strutting on a limb with its neck run out gobbling and all 6 beards hanging down. It was very impressive. But probably, I can't think of any feature, and I'm picking my words carefully here because one of the most infatuating subjects when it comes to the turkey of the biology is turkey poop. The kids love these discussions. But you can actually, because it's an important feature of the sign that we look for to know that turkeys are in the area, you can actually tell the male from the female. Female droppings are in a J shape. In typical male fashion, they just kind of leave a mess and walk away. Female droppings are more popcorn shaped. In the shadow boxes that I have to distinguish the different types with actual droppings, there's also a dropping in there that gets to be golf ball size, even bigger. And this is important to be able to recognize because what that tells you is that somewhere close by there's a nesting hen. The one who created us all put together a very special feature of the wild turkey female's nest. It's called the cloaca, which is a chamber at the very end of her digestive system that allows her to relieve herself without leaving her nest during the incubation period. Pretty neat. But what that means is, whenever she does get to leave her nest, she is going to deposit one of these discharges that is going to be huge. And it's going to be a telltale sign for the person who is going to put all the pieces of this puzzle together. One that I should note, and because our subject matter today has to deal with conservation primarily, is that if we go back to the history of the conservation, in 1937, the Hyndman-Roberts Act was initiated. And what that did, it put an excise tax on all of the equipment that hunters use. And it's that tax that has bought our game lands and our license revenue that keeps these conservation efforts alive. Many people don't realize that those are the tax dollars that did this. And then following the Pittman-Roberts Act, there was actually an increase to 11% tax on archery. So this generates a lot of revenue. But an amazing fact is, in the mid-'80s, there was legislation afoot, or an attempt at legislation, to do away with these taxes. Now tell me if you've ever heard of a situation like this. The people that were paying those taxes, which is under 20% of our general populace, went to our legislators and said, no, we want to keep paying these taxes. We need to. That's what conservation is all about. Now, I don't know. I guess there are a lot of people that couldn't get out of bed on Saturday morning. I don't know that we've gotten any questions. But usually, there are a lot. Missy?
When you were talking about how intelligent the turkeys are, didn't Ben Franklin want the turkey to be our national bird instead of bald eagle?
That is a story that is told often. And he did say, why don't we have the turkey as our national bird whenever they chose the eagle? Historians argue as to whether or not he was revering the turkey or maligning the eagle as a bird that is a scavenger, a nest robber, you know. So, but that is true. It's recorded that he said that.
I think that's really cool. Then, when you were talking about the 4 different subspecies of turkey, I know that. Which is the hardest to hunt? And also, are any still endangered or threatened?
None of them are really threatened right now, although our numbers are diminishing. And thank goodness we do have a task force of biologists who are working very hard. That's why we have regulations to determine the length of the season, so that we always have these turkeys here. But my answer is always the most difficult one to hunt, and I don't care what subspecies it is, what state it's in, what geographic location. It's the pressured bird. The one that is feeling the most pressure is going to be the most aware of the hunters, and it'll be the most difficult to hunt.
That makes perfect sense. Do you have a secret call that works for you whenever you're hunting turkeys?
There's no call in any hunter's bag of tricks that works every time. But there's a go-to call that I use sometimes as a court of last resort, because turkeys are very gregarious. They can't resist coming to see a fight, like kids on a playground. So if you can replicate the sound of a bunch of turkeys fighting, generally turkeys may come in to hear that. This is only the second time probably I've done this in public, because you're going to think that I've lost everything, just completely lost my marbles whenever I do this. But this is what a bunch of turkeys sound like, and sometimes, more often than you'd realize, they will come to see this. You have to keep doing that for them to come. So you have to train your hunter which direction to be watching. He's the one that has to keep an eye out for the birds, and you have to be in a position where they can't see you, just hear you, to come to the sound. Now, we didn't even get to touch too much on one of the most fascinating elements of of all turkey hunting, and that's the calling. The two-note yelp of a bird is very distinctive. The tools of the trade are almost endless. As any wife of a turkey hunter can tell you, the question is, why are there so many different calls? And please don't use them in the house. But each one has its own distinct use. There's a call that replicates the gobbler, and even a younger gobbler. Knowing when and how to use these makes a difference. But going back to those great hunters that had to be good, the Native Americans, the oldest and still one of the most fascinating and effective calls is the turkey wingbone call. A call that's actually fashioned out of the bones from a turkey's wing. They become a folk art item now. There are so many different types that are formulated, and yet they still all work. But our forefathers that used a stick and a string used every part of the turkey. The flight feathers were used to fletch their arrows. Wing bones were used for calls. They made their headdresses. Probably nobody appreciated the wild turkey more. Our job now is to carry that on. Think about joining the National Wild Turkey Federation. It's not the engine on a conservation train, but by no means is it the caboose either.
We have one more question.
Okay.
Before we get here, is are there telltale signs of turkey scratch versus other animals?
Repeat that, please.
Are there telltale signs of turkey scratch versus any other animal?
Telltale sign. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much for commenting.
Oh, okay. I think the question, if I understand it, is there anything else that's going to distinguish the presence of turkeys more than turkey scratch? Probably not. Missy can tell you, because she just saw them yesterday, how much a turkey can tear up the yard. I mean, when they're out there searching for food, they can really turn things upside down. Turkey scratchings can tell you what direction they went. They can tell you a lot of things. But at the same time, turkey droppings, they lose feathers all year long. It's called molting. Those feathers will tell you what gender that turkey is, how old that turkey was, once you get to learn to read those signs. So I invite you to come to Stackhouse Park this spring. We've just covered the tip of the iceberg. And we're done.
So, Tom, in our last moment, you've been doing turkey clinics for well over 25 years. When is your next one, and what was your most gratifying moment?
Our next one is June 12th at Stackhouse Park. Lord willing, and if Elk doesn't rise in front of the pavilion. But my most gratifying moment, very quickly, was one. There are two actually. There was a single father who didn't hunt, who had a daughter that wanted to hunt. And I was so honored whenever he brought her to our clinic because he wanted her to learn the right way to do it, the safe way to do it, the ethical way to do it, which is the only way. The other one, which humbled me, was when I was teaching out at the Women's Wilderness Escape in New Mexico for the NRA. It was a 2-week camp. And my responsibilities were to do a turkey clinic, and I was also on the team of archery instructors. On the archery field, I was asked to do a segment on hunting willow And before I did that, there's a woman who came forth, a rancher from out that way, who explained to me that there was no hunting on her ranch, and there never would be any hunting on her ranch. But she just wanted me to know that going in. And I said, I respect that, and I respect your sharing with me. And I respect your staying. But when it was all over, she invited me to come to her ranch and take her daughter hunting. Thanks, Missy.